The sound of Kyle's heavy boots hitting the metal floor rang out through the empty hallway. Each step made a loud echo that bounced off the cold walls of the detention wing. It was quiet here, too quiet. Most of the cells were empty now that the war had cooled down a bit, but Cell 7 had someone in it. Someone very different. Kyle stopped in front of the thick reinforced door and looked through the small window. Inside sat Torvik, a Vrelian warrior who had been captured 2 days ago after his fighter ship got blown apart during a battle near the Jupiter station. The alien sat perfectly still against the far wall, his back straight, his forearms crossed over his chest in some kind of formal pose. His skin had a rough, grayish texture that reminded Kyle of stone, and his eyes were a deep orange color that seemed to glow slightly in the dim light of the cell. Torvik hadn't moved much since they brought him in. He just sat there, waiting. Kyle knew what he was waiting for. Death. That's what Torvik expected. That's what all the Vrelian prisoners expected when humans captured them. Kyle pressed a button on the wall panel, and the small slot at the bottom of the door slid open with mechanical hiss. He bent down and pushed a tray through the opening. On it was a simple meal, nothing fancy, just some protein, vegetables, and water. Standard prisoner rations, the same stuff they gave to human prisoners. "Brought you food," Kyle said, his voice casual, like he was talking to any other person. Torvik's orange eyes shifted to look at the tray, but he didn't move, not even a little bit. The translator device attached to his chest flickered with a blue light, and then spoke in a flat, robotic voice that translated his words into English. "I will not eat your poison, human. Execute me with honor." Kyle stood up and let out a small sigh. This wasn't the first time a Vrelian prisoner had said something like this. They all thought the same thing. They all believed humans would poison them or torture them before killing them. That's what their leaders told them. That's what their propaganda broadcast said every single day. "We don't execute prisoners," Kyle said, keeping his tone calm and matter-of-fact. He wasn't angry or offended. He just stated it like it was the most obvious thing in the world. Eat or don't. Your choice, buddy. He turned and started walking away, his boots making those same echoing sounds again. Behind him, he could feel Torvik's eyes watching him leave, probably trying to figure out what kind of trick this was. Kyle had been doing this job for almost a year now, ever since he got transferred to the detention facility. He'd seen plenty of prisoners come through, both human and alien. Some were scared, some were angry, some were broken. But the Vrelian ones always had the same look. Confusion mixed with stubborn pride. They couldn't understand why they were still alive. Back in the cell, Torvik remained frozen in place, staring at the tray of food sitting just a few feet away from him. Steam rose gently from the warm meal. His stomach twisted with hunger. He hadn't eaten in over 3 days, not since before the battle. But he wouldn't give the humans the satisfaction of watching him die slowly from poison. Every Vrelian soldier knew the stories. They learned them from the time they were younglings in the military academies. Humans were brutal, savage creatures who showed no mercy to their enemies. When they captured Vrelian warriors, they tortured them for information and then executed them in horrible ways. It was doctrine, written in every military manual, taught in every training session, repeated in every briefing before battle. So why was he still breathing? Why had they given him medical treatment for his injuries? Why was this human guard bringing him food and talking to him like he was a regular person instead of an enemy combatant? Torvik's mind raced with possibilities. Maybe this was psychological warfare. Maybe they wanted to make him comfortable before they struck. Maybe they were studying him, waiting for the right moment to extract information through some advanced technique he didn't know about yet. The smell of the food reached him, and his stomach growled loudly despite his determination to ignore it. The tray sat there, innocent-looking, almost mocking him with its presence. Minutes turned into an hour. Torvik didn't move. The food began to cool. Outside his cell, the facility was quiet except for the occasional sound of footsteps or distant voices. No screams of torture. No sound of executions. Just the normal, boring sounds of a regular building. This didn't make sense. None of it made sense. In Vrelian prison camps, captured humans were processed and eliminated within 48 hours. It was efficient, clean, and prevented them from becoming a burden on resources. That's how war worked. That's how it had always worked. But Kyle had just walked away like it was nothing, like Torvik was just another person who needed a meal. The human hadn't threatened him, hadn't interrogated him, hadn't even seemed particularly interested in him as an enemy. He was just doing a job, delivering food, and moving on. Torvik's hands slowly uncrossed. He stared at them. These hands had fired weapons at human ships that had fought in 6 major battles, that had been trained since childhood to destroy Earth's forces. And now those same hands were shaking slightly from weakness and hunger. The food was probably poisoned. It had to be. But what did it matter? If they wanted him dead, they could just shoot him. Why go through all this trouble? Maybe the human was telling the truth. Maybe they really didn't execute prisoners. No, that was impossible. That went against everything he knew, everything he'd been taught. But the doubt had been planted, and it was growing. 3 weeks went by, and Torvik was still alive. That fact alone kept him awake at night, staring at the ceiling of his cell, trying to understand what game the humans were playing. 21 days. That was 21 days longer than any Vrelian prisoner should have survived in enemy hands. At least, that's what he'd always been told. The routine had become almost normal, which disturbed him more than he wanted to admit. Every morning, Kyle or one of the other guards would bring food. Every afternoon, the medical team would check his injuries, which were healing surprisingly well. And every evening, around the same time, Lieutenant Amy Rodriguez would show up at his cell door. Amy was different from the other humans. She was shorter than Kyle, with dark hair pulled back in a tight ponytail, and she had this way of looking at Torvik, like he was actually interesting rather than dangerous. The first few times she came by, she just stood outside his cell and talked about random things. The weather on Earth, how the detention facility was built, what she had for lunch that day. Torvik ignored her completely, keeping his forearms crossed and his orange eyes fixed on the wall. He figured if he didn't respond, she'd eventually get bored and leave him alone. But Amy kept coming back, day after day, and her questions started getting more specific. "What's your homeworld like?" she asked one day, holding a small digital notepad. "I've seen pictures, but I'd love to hear about it from someone who actually lived there." Torvik said nothing. This had to be an interrogation technique, trying to get him comfortable so he'd accidentally reveal military secrets. "Do Vrelians really have 3 moons?" Amy continued, not seeming bothered by his silence. "Because that must make for some pretty amazing nights. I bet the tides are crazy with 3 moons affecting them." Still nothing from Torvik, but internally he felt a small pang. Yes, the 3 moons made for beautiful nights. He remembered watching them rise over the crystal valleys near his home city when he was young, before the military academy, before the war. But he pushed those memories away. She was trying to manipulate him. Days turned into another week. Amy kept showing up, kept asking questions. She asked about Vrelian music, about their food, about their families, and how their society worked. Sometimes she'd share things about human culture, too, like she was having an actual conversation, even though Torvik never responded. "My grandmother makes this amazing dish called tamales," Amy said one evening, settling into her usual spot outside his cell. "It takes forever to make, like hours and hours, but they're so worth it." Do Vrelians have any foods like that? Things that take a long time but are special. Torvik's jaw tightened. Yes, they did. The ceremonial feast bread that his mother used to make for important occasions took 2 full days to prepare properly. But he wouldn't tell this human that. He wouldn't give her anything. By the end of the 3rd week, something inside Torvik snapped. He couldn't take it anymore. The waiting, the confusion, the strange kindness that made no sense. He shot to his feet, all 4 arms gesturing in frustration, and his translator crackled to life with more emotion than it had shown since his capture. "Why do you delay?" he demanded, his voice harsh and loud in the small cell. "Kill me and be done with it. This torture of waiting, of pretending, of your false kindness, it is worse than an honest execution. If you have any honor at all, end this now." Amy actually looked startled. She took a small step back, and for a moment, genuine confusion crossed her face. Not the confusion of someone caught in a lie, but the confusion of someone who truly didn't understand what Torvik was talking about. "Kill you?" She repeated slowly, like she was trying to make sure she heard him correctly. That's against the Geneva Conventions. You're a prisoner of war, not we don't just execute people. That's not how this works. Lies! Torvik hissed, pressing closer to the reinforced glass that separated them. The Empire knows what you do to captives. We have reports, documentation, witness accounts from recovered bodies. Humans show no mercy. You torture for information, and then dispose of prisoners like waste. Do not insult me with these fairy tales about conventions and laws. Amy's expression shifted from confusion to something that looked almost like sadness. She stood there quietly for a moment, then pulled out a small tablet from her jacket pocket. Her fingers moved quickly across the screen, tapping and scrolling through something. Torvik, she said softly, turning the tab around so he could see the screen. I want to show you something, and I need you to really look at it, okay? The screen displayed a video feed. Torvik's eyes narrowed as he tried to make sense of what he was seeing. It was another Vrelian, one he didn't recognize, sitting in what looked like a comfortable room with windows showing a blue sky outside. The Vrelian was talking to someone off-screen, and he looked healthy, well-fed, completely unharmed. Amy swiped to another video. This one showed 3 Vrelians sitting at a table, eating a meal together, talking and even making gestures that Torvik recognized as laughter. They weren't in cells. They weren't restrained. They were just existing, like regular people. These are other Vrelian prisoners, Amy explained, her voice gentle but firm. Some are here in this facility. Some are at other locations. They're alive, healthy, and look, this one here. She tapped the screen and pulled up another video. This is a video call session through the Red Cross channels. See? He's talking to his family back on your homeworld. We facilitate these calls every 2 weeks for prisoners who want them. Torvik's hands began to tremble. On the screen, he watched as a Vrelian warrior, someone who wore the same uniform he once did, spoke with what appeared to be his mate and 2 younglings. The warrior's face showed emotion that Torvik recognized, the kind of emotion you only show with family, real emotion, not the face of someone being tortured or forced to perform for a camera. No, Torvik whispered, but his voice had lost his conviction. This is propaganda. Fabricated videos to break my spirit. Amy shook her head slowly. It's not. I can arrange for you to talk to some of them, if you want, face to face. Would fabricated videos let you do that? The world seemed to tilt sideways. Torvik reached out with one hand to steady himself against the wall. Everything he knew, everything he'd been taught since he was a youngling in the academy, everything the Empire had drilled into every soldier's head, it was all crashing down around him like a building with its foundation removed. If this was true, if humans really didn't execute their prisoners, then what else had been a lie? The explosion hit at 3 a.m, right when most of the facility was running on night shift with minimal staff. Torvik was lying on his bed, not really sleeping because he never slept well anymore, not since Amy had shown him those videos. His mind was still processing everything, still trying to reconcile what he'd been taught his whole life with what he was seeing with his own eyes. Then the whole building shook like a giant had picked it up and slammed it back down. The lights flickered, went out completely. Then emergency red lighting kicked in, bathing everything in an eerie crimson glow. Alarm started screaming, a high-pitched wail that made Torvik's head hurt. He jumped to his feet, all 4 arms instinctively moving to defensive positions even though he had no weapons. Another explosion, closer this time. Torvik could hear it clearly, the distinctive sound of Vrelian plasma charges. His heart, which beat in a different rhythm than human hearts, suddenly started pounding faster. That was his people. That was a Vrelian attack pattern. They'd come for their captured warriors. They'd come for him. The sounds of combat echoed through the hallways. Plasma fire, the sharp crack of human projectile weapons, shouting in both languages, and the heavy footsteps of armored commandos moving fast through the building. Section C, that's where the breach was. Torvik knew the facility layout by now. He'd watched the guards come and go enough times to memorize their routes. Section C was 2 corridors away from his cell block. Suddenly, his cell door sparked and sizzled. The electronic lock had been damaged by the explosions, and the reinforced door slid open about halfway before getting stuck. But halfway was enough. There was a gap wide enough for him to squeeze through. Freedom, escape, everything he'd been hoping for since the moment he woke up in human captivity. Torvik didn't hesitate. He pushed through the gap, his rough gray skin scraping against the door frame, and stumbled out into the corridor. The emergency lighting made everything look like it was covered in blood. Smoke drifted through the air, making it hard to see clearly. To his left, towards Section C, he could hear the sounds of the rescue team fighting their way deeper into facility. He ran. His legs, stronger than human legs, carried him quickly down the corridor toward the sounds of his people who had come to save him, his people who would take him home, away from this confusing place where nothing made sense, where enemies acted like friends, where everything he believed had been turned upside down. The corridor ended in a T-junction. Torvik skidded to a stop, trying to remember which way led to Section C. Left or right, the smoke was thicker here, and through it he could see debris scattered across the floor. Chunks of ceiling, broken pipes, sparking wires hanging down like dead snakes. That's when he heard it. A sound that cut through all the other noise. A groan of metal under too much stress. And then a voice. A human voice. A voice he recognized. Help. Amy's voice came out weak and strained. Somebody help. Torvik turned right and saw her. The explosion had brought down part of the ceiling in this section, and a massive support beam, easily weighing several hundred pounds, had fallen across Lieutenant Amy Rodriguez. She was pinned from the waist down, lying on her side, one arm trapped beneath her body, and the other reaching out like she was trying to pull herself free, but couldn't. Blood was pooling around her shoulder, where a piece of shrapnel had torn through her uniform. Her face was pale, even in the red emergency lighting, and her eyes were squeezed shut in pain. Then those eyes opened and saw him. For a second, just a brief moment, Torvik saw hope flash across her face. Then it changed to something else. Resignation, maybe, or understanding. Go. Amy choked out, blood flecking her lips. She tried to gesture with her free hand, waving him away. Just go. Your people are here. Go home. Every survival instinct Torvik possessed was screaming at him. Run. Your rescue team is here. This is your chance. This is what you've been waiting for. The humans will execute you if you stay. That's what they do. That's what everyone knows they do. But even as those thoughts raced through his mind, other thoughts pushed against him. Thoughts of Amy visiting him every day for 3 weeks. Her questions about his homeworld, his culture, his people. Questions that weren't interrogations, but genuine curiosity. The patience she'd shown when he refused to speak. The sadness in her face when she realized he truly believed humans would kill him. The tablet. Those videos of other Vrelian prisoners, alive and healthy. Video calls with their families. The truth she'd shown him. The truth that shattered everything he'd been taught. Behind him, towards Section C, Torvik could hear his people calling out in Vrelian, searching for prisoners to rescue. They'd be here in minutes, maybe less. This was his window, his only chance. He looked at Amy, really looked at her. She was losing blood fast. The beam across her body was crushing her. Without help, she'd die here. And she knew it, but she was still telling him to go, to save himself, even though he was the enemy, even though every military doctrine said she should let him die or kill him herself if she could. Torvik's forearms moved before his brain fully processed a decision. He grabbed the beam, 2 hands on each end, and lifted with all his strength. Vrelians were stronger than humans, their muscles denser, their bodies built for higher gravity. The beam rose slowly, groaning and scraping against the debris around it. Move! Torvik grunted in English, the first word he'd spoken in that language. Now! Move! Amy's eyes went wide with shock, but she didn't waste time questioning it. She dragged herself out from under the beam, gasping in pain as her crushed legs came free. The moment she was clear, Torvik let the beam drop with a thunderous crash. Amy tried to stand, but her legs buckled immediately. Her face twisted in agony, and she would have fallen if Torvik hadn't caught her with 2 of his arms. She was lighter than he expected, or maybe adrenaline was making him stronger. Her blood was soaking into his uniform now, warm and wet. Medical bay. Amy gasped, her voice barely a whisper. Corridor B, that way? She pointed with a shaking hand. Torvik adjusted his grip, lifting her more securely. 2 arms under her legs, one supported her back, and one protecting her head. He started moving, running as fast as he could while carrying her, his feet pounding against the floor. They passed other humans in the corridors, guards with weapons who were rushing toward the breach to fight off the Vrelian commandos. Every single one of them stopped and stared in complete shock at the sight of a Vrelian prisoner, carrying their injured lieutenant. Some raised their weapons, uncertain, but Torvik didn't stop. He couldn't stop. "Don't shoot," Amy called out, her voice stronger than Torvik expected given her injuries. "Stand down. He's helping." Corridor B appeared ahead, and Torvik could see the medical bay doors. They were sealed, locked down because of the attack, but there was an emergency call button next to them. Torvik slammed his free hand against it repeatedly until the doors slid open. Medical staff stood inside, frozen in surprise. A human male in a white coat with gray hair recovered first and rushed forward. "Get her on the table. Now!" Torvik carried Amy to the examination table and laid her down as gently as he could. His hands were covered in her blood. The medical team swarmed around her immediately, cutting away her uniform, applying pressure to wounds, hooking up monitors that started beeping frantically. Through the facility's shattered windows, Torvik could see the night sky, and there, rising up and accelerating away, was a Vrelian assault ship, his people, his rescue, leaving without him because he'd made a choice, an impossible choice, a choice that went against every bit of his training and everything he'd ever been taught about humans. But as he stood there, watching that ship disappear into the stars, Torvik realized something. Amy had been right. Everything had been a lie. And maybe, just maybe, showing mercy was a weakness after all. 2 days after the attack, Torvik sat in his cell and watched the door. They'd moved him to a different section of the facility, one that hadn't been damaged in the explosion. This cell was identical to his old one. Same size, same basic furniture, same reinforced glass separating him from the corridor outside. But somehow it felt different now. Everything felt different. He expected anger from the humans. He expected punishment. Maybe even the execution he'd originally been waiting for. After all, his people had attacked their facility, killed 3 guards, and injured a dozen more, and he'd been the reason for the attack. A rescue mission. For him, the fact that he'd saved Amy's life probably wouldn't matter much when they weighed it against all that damage and death. At least, that's what would happen in a Vrelian military prison. Save one enemy's life, but cause the death of several others through your mere existence? Execution. Swift and certain. So when the door to the cell area opened, and he saw Amy walking toward him, Torvik felt his whole body tense up. This was it. She was here to tell him what would happen next, what his punishment would be. But something was off. Amy wasn't in her usual uniform. She was wearing civilian clothes, comfortable pants, and a simple shirt, and her left arm was in a sling, held close to her body, with bandages visible where they peeked out from under her sleeve. She moved slowly, carefully, like someone who was still hurting but trying not to show it too much. She stopped in front of his cell and just looked at him for a long moment. Torvik couldn't read her expression. Humans were hard to understand sometimes. Their faces showed emotions differently than Vrelian faces did. "They told me to take a week off to recover," Amy said finally, her voice quiet in the empty corridor. "I made it 2 days before I needed to come talk to you." Torvik said nothing. He wasn't sure what to say. Amy shifted her weight, and Torvik could see her wince slightly from the movement. Those crushed legs were probably still healing. The doctors had told him she was lucky to keep them, that a few more minutes under that beam and the damage would have been permanent. "You could have escaped," Amy said, and there was something in her voice that Torvik couldn't quite identify. Not anger, not gratitude, something else. Your people came for you. You had a clear path to the breach point. You could have been gone, back with your fleet, back home. Why didn't you? Torvik's mandibles, the small appendages near his mouth that move when Vrelians experience strong emotions, clicked together several times. If a human could have heard the sound properly, they might have recognized it as a Vrelian version of a bitter laugh. A laugh at himself, at the situation, at the absolute absurdity of everything. "Because you showed me the truth," Torvik said, and his translator rendered his words into flat English, though the emotion in his actual voice was much more complex. The Empire taught us that humans were monsters, savage beasts who knew nothing of honor or mercy. They taught us that you torture prisoners, that you execute the wounded, that you celebrate death and suffering. He paused, looking down at his 4 hands resting on his knees. These hands had fired weapons that killed human soldiers. These same hands had lifted a beam to save a human life. But you, he continued, looking back up at Amy, you came my cell every day. You asked me about my home, my culture, my people, not for intelligence gathering, not for interrogation. You asked because you actually care about the answers. You treated me like I mattered, like I was a person, not just an enemy soldier. Amy moved close to the glass and slowly lowered herself to sit on the floor, using her good arm to steady herself. It was an oddly vulnerable position for someone to take in front of a prisoner, but she didn't seem concerned. Once she was settled, she looked up at him through the reinforced barrier. You do matter, she said simply. That's the whole point, Torvik. You matter. Every person matters. That doesn't change just because there's a war happening. Torvik felt something twist in his chest. In Vrelian society, individuals were important only in how they served the Empire. A soldier mattered because he could fight. A scientist mattered because she could invent new weapons. A farmer mattered because he could feed the troops. But matter just for existing? Just for being alive? That concept didn't really exist in his culture. My people execute prisoners, Torvik said, and he felt shame saying out loud, shame that he'd never felt before about the simple fact of Vrelian military doctrine. We were told you did the same. We were told it was necessary, efficient, the only logical way to handle captured enemies. We were told everyone did it because war is war and mercy is weakness. Amy shook her head slowly, carefully because of her injuries. We don't, she said, and her voice was firm now, carrying absolute conviction. We never did. Not officially, not secretly, not ever. War doesn't erase someone's right to live. Being on opposite sides of conflict doesn't make you less of a person. She gestured around at the facility with her good hand. Yeah, we keep you locked up. We have to. You're soldiers from an enemy force. But locked up isn't the same as dead. You get food, medical care, communication with your families when possible. You get treated like human beings. Well, you know what I mean. Like people, like individuals who have value. Torvik looked down at his 4 hands again, spreading them out in front of him, studying them like he'd never seen them before. The right front hand had a scar across the palm from a training accident years ago. The left rear hand had slightly longer fingers than the others, something he'd been self-conscious about as a youngling. These hands had been trained to destroy, to kill, to serve the Empire's war machine. I killed humans in battle, Torvik said quietly. Many humans. I was a fighter pilot. I shot down 7 of your ships before mine was destroyed. 7 ships. That's at least 7 dead pilots. Probably more if any of them were larger craft with crews. He looked up at Amy, meeting her eyes. I saved you because it was right. Not because you were human or because you'd been kind to me. I saved you because leaving you to die under that beam would have been wrong. And I realized something in that moment. His mandibles clicked again, but this time it was a different sound. Not bitter. Something more like wonder. I thought only Vrelians understood honor. I thought only we had concepts of right and wrong, of duty and sacrifice. We were taught that humans were barely sentient, that you operated on base instincts and selfishness. But I was wrong. Completely, utterly wrong. Amy smiled, a small, sad smile that made her look tired. We're not that different, your people and mine. We both love, we both fear, we both believe in things bigger than ourselves. The only difference is what we've been taught to believe about each other. Torvik nodded slowly, a gesture he'd learned from watching the humans. The Empire lied to us. About everything. About what you do to prisoners. About what kind of people you are. They lied so we would fight without hesitation, without doubt, without mercy. He paused. I wonder what else they lied about. Probably a lot, Amy said. Most governments lie to their people during war. It makes things easier. Makes soldiers more willing to kill. Makes civilians more willing to sacrifice. Lies are useful tools. But truth matters more, Torvik said. Yeah, Amy agreed. Truth matters more. They sat there in silence for a while, a human and a Vrelian separated by reinforced glass, but connected by something neither of them had expected: understanding, respect, maybe even the beginnings of friendship, as strange as that seemed. 3 months passed in a strange kind of limbo. The war didn't end all at once with some dramatic final battle. Instead, it sort of fizzled out like a candle running out of wax. Both sides were exhausted, resource depleted, and facing populations that were tired of sending their sons and daughters off to die in space. Negotiations happened in neutral territory, dragging on for weeks as diplomats argued over terms and conditions and borders and reparations. Torvik watched it all unfold through news broadcasts that Kyle brought him on a tablet. He watched Vrelian officials and human officials sitting at the same table, talking instead of shooting. It felt surreal. Wrong. Almost. His entire adult life had been defined by this war, and now it was just ending because both sides agreed they were too tired to keep fighting. The facility had changed too. More Vrelian prisoners had been transferred here from other locations, and Torvik could interact with them during designated recreation times. At first, the other Vrelians didn't trust him. Word had spread about what happened during the rescue attempt, how he'd saved a human officer instead of escaping. Some called him a traitor. Others just avoided him, unsure what to make of a soldier who'd chosen the enemy over his own people. But slowly, things shifted. The other prisoners started seeing how the humans actually treated them. They got the same revelation Torvik had experienced. The food wasn't poisoned. The medical care was real. The video calls with family weren't fabrications. Everything they'd been taught was a lie, and facing that truth was harder than any battle wound. Torvik helped where he could. He talked to the others, shared his story, answered their questions. Some listened. Some didn't want to hear it. Change was difficult, especially when it meant admitting you'd been wrong about something fundamental. Then one morning, Colonel Jack Morrison came to Torvik's cell with a folder full of papers. Jack was older than most of the other human officers, probably his 50s, with gray hair at his temples and lines around his eyes that suggested he smiled often. He'd been running the facility since before Torvik arrived. Got some news for you, Jack said, pulling up a chair outside the cell. He sat down with a heavy sigh, like someone whose back hurt from too many years of military service. The armistice was signed yesterday. Official ceasefire across all territories. War's over. Torvik felt something shift inside his chest. Over. The war was over. He should have felt relief, maybe even joy. Instead, he felt numb. Empty. What did a soldier do when the war that defined him simply stopped existing? Jack opened the folder and pulled out several documents. These are for you. Prisoner exchange protocols. Your people submitted a list of soldiers they want back, and your name is on it. You're free to go home, Torvik. Back to your fleet, back to your planet. There's a transport ship leaving in 4 days. Home. The word felt strange in Torvik's mind. He hadn't thought about home in months. Hadn't let himself think about it, because thinking about things you couldn't have was a form of torture. But now it was real. He could go back. See the 3 moons rising over the crystal valleys. Walk streets he'd known as a youngling. Find whatever remained of his old life. But Torvik's translator stayed, quiet for a long moment, as he processed what Jack had said. His people wanted him back. The same people who'd taught him that humans were monsters. The same government that had lied about everything. The same military that executed prisoners as standard protocol. They will execute me, Torvik said finally, his voice flat through the translator. Soldiers who spend time with humans are considered contaminated, compromised, security risks. It is protocol. I know too much now. I've seen too much. They cannot allow me to return and spread doubt among other soldiers. Jack's expression didn't change much, but Torvik had learned to read human faces better over the past months. He saw the slight tightening around Jack's eyes. The colonel had already known this. He'd expected Torvik to figure it out. The cell door opened and Amy walked in. Her arm was out of the sling now, mostly healed, though Torvik noticed she still favored it slightly when she moved. She'd been cleared for duty 2 weeks ago and had immediately come back to work at the facility. Some people called her crazy for returning to a place where she'd nearly died. Amy called it unfinished business. She came and stood beside Jack, looking through the reinforced glass at Torvik with those expressive human eyes that had asked him so many questions over the months. Then stay, Amy said simply. Apply for asylum. It's a legal option under the new treaty. Prisoners who have legitimate fear of persecution if they return home can request protected status on Earth. Torvik felt all four of his hands clench into fists. I am your enemy. You were, Jack corrected, his voice gentle but firm. Past tense. Were, now you're the guy who saved one of our people when you could have escaped. You're the guy who helped other Vrelian prisoners adjust when they arrived here. You're the guy who's been teaching our cultural liaison team about Vrelian customs, so we don't accidentally insult your people during peace negotiations. That counts for something, Torvik. That counts for a lot. Amy stepped closer to the glass. We need people like you, people who've seen both sides, people who understand that the propaganda was wrong on both sides. The peace is fragile right now. One wrong move, one misunderstanding, one politician trying to restart the war for their own gain, and everything falls apart. But if we have people who can build bridges, who can show others that the enemy isn't actually an enemy at all, just people on the other side of conflict, then maybe the peace holds. Torvik looked between them. Jack, the older human who'd fought in this war for years and lost people he cared about. Amy, who'd nearly died under a collapsed beam, but still came back to help. These impossible humans who'd shown mercy when every logical calculation said they should have shown cruelty, who'd fed him when they could have starved him, who'd healed his wounds when they could have let him die, who'd given him truth when they could have fed him more lies. He thought about the Empire, the government that had raised him, trained him, sent him to kill and die for their expansion plans. The same government that lied to its soldiers about what humans actually were. The same military that would execute him as a security risk because he now knew the truth. He thought about the other Vrelian prisoners who were going home, the ones who hadn't spent as much time with humans, who hadn't seen as much. Would they tell the truth when they got back? Or would they stay quiet to protect themselves? Would the Empire even let them speak? Or would there be debriefing sessions that were really just ways to make sure no one spread information that contradicted official doctrine? I will stay, Torvik said, and he felt something settle inside him as he made the decision. A kind of peace he hadn't felt in a long time. And I will tell others the truth about humanity. Not just Vrelians, but anyone who will listen. The truth that you are not monsters. The truth that mercy is not weakness. The truth that honor exists on both sides of any conflict, if you're willing to look for it. Amy smiled, a real, genuine smile that reached her eyes and made her whole face light up. She extended her right hand toward the glass, palm out, in that gesture humans use for greeting and agreement and connection. Torvik stood and walked the glass. He raised one of his four hands and pressed it against the barrier from his side, matching her gesture. His hand was larger than hers, his gray skin rough against the smooth surface of the reinforced glass. Through that barrier, they touched without touching, connected by choice rather than circumstance. Jack stood up, gathering his papers. I'll start the asylum paperwork. It'll take a few weeks to process, but you'll have full legal status once it goes through. Work authorization, housing assistance, the whole package. We'll set you up with the diplomatic corps. They need cultural advisors badly. Thank you, Torvik said, and he meant it with every fiber of his being. As Jack and Amy turned to leave, Torvik looked down at his four hands again. These hands had fired weapons that killed humans. These hands had lifted a beam to save a human life. These hands would now work to build peace instead of war. Peace, he realized, wasn't won through strength alone. It wasn't achieved by being the strongest, the most ruthless, the most willing to destroy your enemy. Peace required something much harder, much braver. It required the courage to trust your enemy's humanity, to see past the propaganda and the fear and the years of conflict, to recognize that the people on the other side were just people, flawed, complicated, trying to survive and protect what they loved, just like everyone else. The war was over, but Torvik's real work was just beginning. And for the first time since his ship had been destroyed and he'd woken up in human custody, He felt something he thought he'd lost forever: hope.